I'm Aaron Brockmeyer, and I serve as a pastor of Faith Baptist Church in North Minneapolis. And whether you're a pastor or a leader, I think these last few weeks, month even, it's been difficult. There's been a lot of brokenness in this world. And particularly at our church, there's been a number of people who are dealing with health issues and challenges. And yet, I find this encouragement on a day like this, where I see my church here, I see their lives lived out through the week on Facebook, on Instagram, in conversations at their workplace. I see you all here today. I hear messages like this, and I am encouraged because I do believe that we can reach into that darkness with Christ's love and bring about goodness in this society, in this city. So it's just an honor to be here this morning to serve with Made to Flourish. We have local sponsors here, and they're more than local sponsors. They are friends. Out here, you'll see numerous different tables set up. All of these individuals, all their organizations are key partners as we work together for the common good of this city and in Minneapolis and Minnesota. They're very eclectic, so as you go around table to table, you can see that there's different means, but the vision is all the same. It's a vision for the common good, to follow Christ, to serve our neighbor. And these are means for you to understand how you can live this out. Practical tools and resources that you can put in place at your church, in your business, in your workplace. So we're just so thankful for all the partners, all the friends here today. And the next speaker is a friend. He is a leader. He is passionate about biblical justice. He believes that if the society is to heal, and that if we are to be able to engage in the future with a way that's just and good for the society, that we as churches need to be developing leaders who are ethnically and economically diverse. Chris Brooks, again, is a leader. He's a husband. He's a father. He's an author. He's a professor. He just started his own new business recently, Issachar Advisors, and he has a book coming out in the fall of 2018 on justice called Be Just.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Chris Brooks. I am from the Twin Cities, born and raised on the south side. As I was just introduced, I teach at Fuller Theological Seminary, one class, because I have a lot of time on my hands. I lead a company. I am very actively engaged with my church. I mentor a number of young people. But at the end of the day, primarily I'm a family man. And family is everything to me. And so 2 weeks ago, I did the hardest thing that I probably have ever had to do in my entire life. When I hugged my wife of 21 years and my 4 children and said goodbye to them as I boarded a plane to Pakistan to preach an open-air revival. Now, before I left for Pakistan, I preached chapel at Bethel a couple days prior, and I said to the crowd with my son and my wife in the audience, I signed up to die, so this might be the last sermon I ever preach. So when I said goodbye to my family that day, I was really, in a sense, preparing myself to say goodbye to my family that day, not knowing what would meet me on the other side of the ocean. I was pleasantly surprised when I arrived at Lahore Airport and was greeted by Pastor Tariq and his family that I was among family. And the news stories that had embedded themselves in my brain and the way that I sort of envisioned the Pakistani people immediately transformed. The Pakistani church, our family on the other side of the ocean, 7,000 miles away, they're strong. They're standing. They're generous. They're kind. They're beautiful. And so I was welcomed into that environment and into that culture in a way that made me feel safe the entire 7 days I was there. Now, I had 2 armed guards with me everywhere I went, packing serious heat, but I didn't need them, in a sense. I felt very safe the whole time I was there. So Pakistan was an interesting experience, but I could not wait to get home to my family, my nuclear family in my home. And it was a 32-hour trip back, which turned out to be 36, because in Chicago O'Hare, they messed up my customs. But at the end of the day, when I got home, I hugged my wife and my children in a way that I probably have never hugged them before. Getting home to my family was a big deal. And for those of you in the room who have children or spouses, you are getting the emotions that I'm getting right now when you think about your family. because I really didn't know if I was going to see them again. Again, I signed up to die. So that was a Friday. I got home. That Sunday, we went to our local church. And as I stated, we're very actively involved in our local church. So we went to church, and it was remarkable to sit in a room with thousands of people and feel like I was among my extended family. You see, for me, the term family is not just a term that describes some biological ties. The term family is a theological term. And it's getting more and more theological the older I get. The more that I travel around and talk to different people, I see the image of God in humanity, and I think family. So here's a big idea. Healthy families flourish. Healthy families are just. Unhealthy families cannot achieve those same outcomes. Now, we say in the body of Christ, and we heard it, I think, even earlier today, that the church is God's plan A, and when I worked at Willow Creek, we used to say there is no plan B. You guys have probably heard that before. I would actually rewind that a little bit and say the family is plan A. There is no plan B. So for the church to function as a family is the fullness of plan A, from my perspective. Now, I want to tell a little bit of a different story from my family perspective. About 7 years ago, we got a call from social services, and this little 6-month-old mass of humanity showed up at our house. Her name is Micah. She's family times 2. She's my cousin's child by birth, but our child now through adoption. And prior to the adoption, we had to go through this really rigorous process of taking her to visits with her birth mother, who I love, who's my cousin, but she was not in a place where she really should have been visiting with little Micah. Every time we would take her to these visits, she would freak out. So she's 6 months old, maybe 9 months old, 12 months old at the different times of the visits. She would get red and splotchy. She would scream. The whole time she was in these visits, sometimes for an hour, she would scream at the top of her lungs. So that by the time we got her back, she was inconsolable. Now, this is not an indictment on my cousin, whom I love, who is created in God's image. This is a picture of what happens when family doesn't work properly. And it's painful for me to reflect on this and think that every week, for I think something like 14 months, we brought our child to a place where she was re-victimized over and over and over again, weekly. Now, eventually we did adopt her, and she now experiences the fullness of what it feels like to be a part of a healthy family. But again, the trauma of that event, those events, sticks with my wife and I. And I was in Starbucks this morning going over my notes, and I just wept, just remembering those moments back then. So I've come today with a question I want all of you church leaders, whether you're in vocational or avocational ministry, to ponder. And that is this. Does your church function more like a forever family or a foster care factory? Let me repeat it in case you missed it. Does your church function more like a forever family or a foster care factory? In a forever family, there's a great deal of forgiveness. There's a great deal of grace. We vet people differently when we need tasks done. I just tell my son, go mow the lawn. I don't ask him for a background check or any of that. In a foster care factory, everybody's a number. Even the best foster care parents can't really attach because it's somewhat unhealthy to attach. And so in a foster care factory methodology, if it's in a church, HR runs radically differently than if it operated like a family. People are expendable. They can come and go. They can be hired and fired. Now, I've worked on 4 different church staffs. The first one was a church of 300. I've worked on a church of 25,000. And I've seen actually family and factory in both. So this talk is also not an indictment of a certain kind of church, size of church. It's really a philosophy of ministry that says God created humanity to function like a family. Therefore, the church, when it's functioning properly, should also function like a family. So does your church operate more like a forever family or a foster factory? Now, as I was thinking about this talk and trying to sort of mentally prepare for, how I would flesh this out, I actually came up with a tale of 2 churches. So we're going to call the first one River Bend. That might be the name of a real church somewhere, I don't know, but let's call it River Bend. At River Bend Church, there's fantastic marketing, fantastic HR processes. There's a really beautiful building that has had multiple iterations of a building campaign. I'm actually at a church right now where we're going through a building campaign, so I know what that's like. I worked at a church that had a $105 million campus, so I know what that's like. At River Bend, things are really well done. Best practices from the corporate world are embedded in everything. Finance, HR, all of it. But people come and go. And when they go, sometimes they go and they are gagged. Sign confidentiality stuff. Don't ever say a word. When people go to plant churches out of this church, maybe they're not allowed to plant within a certain radius because it might threaten the existing congregation. That's not family. I want my son to live as close as possible to me when he leaves my home. I want my daughters to live as close as possible to me. I want to live in as close proximity as possible to my grandchildren. And when they make mistakes, welcome back. Grace, forgiveness. So at a church like River Bend, it would be very, very difficult to equip the HR manager who's hiring people and wants to do this in a just way when your operating system of your church is unjust. There'd be this incongruence between what happens at the pulpit on a Sunday and what actually happens Monday through Friday in the HR office. Now, most of us, whether we know it or not, have professionals in our churches that function in some of these key roles out in the corporate world. HR, finance, marketing, whatever. Your operating system internally, in many ways, is going to be more telling than your sermons. People are going to experience what it feels like to sign up and be a volunteer. People are going to experience what it feels like when you're put in a role that's not a great fit, and someone has to tell you gently that this probably isn't the best fit. And if in your sermons or if in your programs you're saying one thing, but at the level of dealing with your people, you're doing something else, that's a problem. Now, that's internal family stuff. Now let's talk about engaging the outside world. If we can't treat our own people in our own churches that we would consider nuclear family great, how are we going to treat the people on the outside looking in this skeptical society? Wondering, is that the kind of place that me and my family could actually show up and have value? Would we be appreciated there? So let's leave River Bend for a second and let's go to Blend Community Church. In Blend Community Church, there is this core value of family. And in this core value of family at Blend Community Church, there's still vetting, right? You can't put somebody who's a convicted sex offender with young children, right? That's just normal best practice. But you're not grilling people. You find that people at Blend Community Church stick around for a long period of time, go through professional development. If there's some sort of major flaw, some sort of major moral failure, they're not immediately escorted out the door, never to be heard of again. They go through a restoration process. When my daughter or my son comes home and I find a sin in their life, I don't kick them out. When my wife and I disagree, I don't tell her to go sleep on the couch. That's not how family functions. So at Blend Community Church, they've devised a way to treat people like family. They've devised a way to do things justly because everybody they see is a part of the family. So here's the big question for you guys. I want you to reflect on your own church. Which bucket would you put your church in? Would it be family or factory? Now, I'm going to get a little bit transparent for the end of my talk here. I'm born and raised in the Twin Cities, right? I've lived here 36 of my 42 years of life. I've been at almost all of the churches represented in this room in some way, shape, or form at some time. My entire adult life, I have been disgusted at the division in the body of Christ in this city. We talk a good game. But when it's time for churches to come together and get something done, people might show up at a meeting, might even throw a little bit of money on the table, but we're not sitting around the table like family holding hands. We're not suffering with each other and rejoicing with each other as the Bible tells us to do. It's programmatic. It's tactical. It's clean. And I'm telling you, so since we're in a family environment, we have enemies in our city that want to take us out. And they're buying up property and they're buying up land and they've got a strategy. And the connective tissue in the body of Christ is the only solution to this. The only solution. Individual, isolated churches are going to get picked off. So will we become a family or will we continue to be a factory? This is the question that we have to wrestle with in this room today in the Twin Cities. And as an indigenous kid who was raised on the South Side, I'm telling you, I'm dissatisfied with what I see. Thank you.
Thank you,